Hello and welcome to another video for Polymetricity, the CAD course. This video is going to focus on using the Revolve tool. We've seen different tools that let us make 3D shapes, particularly extrusion, but Revolve tool allows us to take a 2D sketch and rotate it around an axis as opposed to pulling it perpendicular or in parallel with the plane that it's drawn on. And so this allows us to kind of make more advanced shapes, and we could kind of make a profile view of something and then spin it either all the way around a circle or partially, and we can get some interesting objects that way. So let's try an example. I'm going to start off by making a new sketch. And this time, since I'm going to be spinning it, I want to spin it standing up around that green axis, the y-axis. So when I draw it, I want it to be on this XY plane, so that when I spin it around the potentially the y-axis, it spins around the correct direction. We can spin it around any axis really, but to make things easier for my example, that's what I'm going to do. So here we go. Again, the shape I'm going to make is not anything in particular. I'm just going to kind of show you the general premise, and you can see really from it we can do quite a bit. So I'm going to use the line tool to make just a shape overall, and then I'm going to use some dimensions to force it to be a little more constrained. So I'm going to start off by click on the origin. I'm going to go up some amount. I'm going to go to the right a bit, and then I'm going to go back in at an angle, and then back out at an angle, and then straight out, and then all the way down and back to the origin. So there's my close shape. And you can see it's mostly pretty much all blue lines except for the one, so that means that all of these things are not constrained, so I can move it around freely, and I don't want that. So I'm going to do some constraining to limit these things overall. The first thing I'll do, just to make it a little bit easier on myself, is set this distance to be a particular distance. I'm going to hit D for dimension on the keyboard. Let's make it exactly 75 millimeters. There it is. The angle between these two lines, I think I'm going to say, I click on them with the dimension tool, and if I click both lines, it gives me the angle tool. It's at 119.7, so let's just make it 120 exactly. Okay. The angle between this line and this line is at 59. Let's go ahead and make it 60 exactly. Notice that moves some things. Let's do the tool dimension for, first of all, before I'm going to hit escape, get rid of the dimensioning tool. I thought I made a horizontal line, but notice that it is not horizontal. So let's choose the horizontal vertical constraint from the horizontal constraint, or the constraint menu, and then force this line at the bottom to be horizontal. And as soon as I do, it becomes black. Let's see if we can force this line to be vertical if it allows us to, or if it's not necessary. There it is. It says it's not necessary, it's over constrained, so we won't do that one. So this line may or may not be horizontal, so let's force it to be horizontal if it lets us. It doesn't, so it must be. I think it recognizes that it's in parallel with the bottom line, so it's not necessary to do this. So let's see what other things it might allow us to do. If I grab this and drag, so for sure this distance needs to be set. So let's hit D for dimension. Let's click this one, and let's put it at 25 millimeters exactly. Okay. What else? If we try to move this up and down, that changes. So either we can set the distance of this length, or we can make the horizontal height. So let's hit D on our keyboard again to dimension. Let's force this to be a particular, oops, hit escape one more time, D for dimension. Let's make this one 30 millimeters exactly. And now notice there's a lot more black lines. Still, this line, this distance can go freely because we have not dimensioned the bottom line or the top one. So let's dimension this bottom line. So let's hit D on the keyboard. Pick the bottom line. Let's make it 50 millimeters exactly. And there it is. And now the only line that's not really dimensioned is that blue one here. And so if we see what we're trying to do, it allows us to kind of make it smaller or bigger because there's no set length. If I dimension the top line, then it'll be locked in place. If I dimension this line, it'll be locked in place. Or if I dimension this line, it'll be locked in place. So any of those lines we have to decide. We have to decide what we're going to do. So I'm going to dimension the top line, and that should force the other two to be dimensioned. So I'm going to click on the top line, hit D on the keyboard, and let's do it at 25 millimeters exactly. And there it is. And now you can see every line is black, which means the entire image is constrained. So I can't grab anything or move anything. Now this on its own is a flat image. I'm going to go ahead and finish my sketch, and we can see that it is standing up in 3D space. The goal here is to be able to swing this thing around, spin it around an axis, and we can get different shaped objects from this. And so this is a pretty powerful tool to take a profile and spin it around. So let's go ahead and do that. In the Create menu, or at the very top, mine also has this Revolve button, but I'm going to go to the Create menu, and then that Revolve option. If we look at the little picture it shows us, it says, revolve a sketch, profile, or planar face, meaning a flat, 2D face, around a selected axis. And we choose the profile, we choose the axis, and it lets us spin. So let's do that. I'm going to click it. It'll bring up on the right side our Revolve menu. Profile is the first thing. Let me choose the profile. I'm going to click on the face. It turns blue. Then axis is the next option on the right. And now what I can do is I can choose any line or any axis that exists. So notice I can choose the X, Y, or Z axis. And if you don't see them here, we can always open them up by clicking Origin, and that also makes them visible. It's hard to see them, but they are there. And there's the blue one, there's the green one. But I'm going to choose this line because this is the one I want. So I'm going to rotate a little bit so we can see it. And this line here is the one I want. So there it is. And as soon as I do it, it spins. And it's hard to see inside, but it is hollow because it is that shape, Revolve. So it actually kind of is almost like a triangular or conical groove or cave in here. And then it actually undoes and opens up wide. And we end up with what looks like very much like a chamfer, but it was created because of this flat line. So if you spin it around. And by default, notice it says that the angle that we've chosen is 360 degrees. If I lower this number, you can see, and that actually, if I do, let's do 180 and then spin around. And let's look at the other side. And there we can see how it actually looks. So on the inside, it was kind of like a hollow cone. And on the outside was this very chamfer-looking opening that we see fit. So the default type for our revolution is an angular. We can also choose to face. So if you want to go from one point to another point, we can use that one. Or full, which it just assumes 360. It doesn't even give you an option. It just kind of does it all the way around. But the default is angle. And again, the angle at 360 is equivalent to the full. So 360 would be the whole way through. And it's a complete shape. And so we can decide what we want. We can also do, by default, the direction is one side, so it spins along across from the starting point around. But if we want, for example, let's say symmetric, then we could, anything under 180, it's going to do both sides at the same time. So if I just go 90 degrees, it's actually 180 because it's 90 degrees on one side, and then it's symmetric or mirrored across, and the result is 180 degrees. And so 180 would be a full 360. So it's up to you to decide which ways. It's not really necessary to switch between them. Two sides, it would let me pick two different angles. So for example, this one might be 90 degrees in rotation from the edge, and this one might be only 20. The sum is 90 plus 20, which is 110. So it's just a matter of what you prefer. And so for whatever reason, you might want a quarter or something like that, and you can pick. But again, the default one side and then angle at whatever number you want is a typical approach. So I'm going to put it back to 360. And there it is. And then the operation is new body by default, and we can see that we've generated a 3D object in our bodies folder, and there it is, right? And so this is a useful thing that we can do, and it's very convenient. So I'm going to try one last thing. I'm going to go ahead and put a hole through the bottom. So I'm going to go to the home view. I'm going to click. I'm going to choose the bottom face right there. It's going to turn blue. I'm going to make a new sketch. It's going to rotate the camera. Choose our circle tool. And let's put a circle in the center. Not too big because I don't want it to cut through anything else. I want to cut it open. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and then I'm going to dimension it. And let's put it at about 15 millimeters. And it is right in the center. And so if I click Finish Sketch, there it is at the bottom. I'm going to use the Extrude tool from our Create menu. I'm going to choose that feature. I'm going to pull it up a little bit, and then I'm going to switch from Extent Distance to All. And that way it cuts enough to get to that opening, because that is a pretty thick bottom. So I'm going to cut through there, and I'm going to click. And then notice the operation is cut because it's red. I'm going to click OK. And there it is. So the same shape, but now it has a hole. So I mean, I don't know what this is. It's not a thing. But the idea is that a rotation made a pretty interesting result. Now, that said, let's try doing something different. If we go to our timeline and go back to our Revolve and open it up, if I were to change which axis I rotated around, we would get a different shape. This thing spun another way would look different. Now, that might mess up my cut through it, but let's try this. Let's re-choose the axis. So instead of being that this line down here, let's choose the bottom line. And now we see what the result is. This thing spun along the x-axis results in this thing. I'm going to click Finish or OK, go to the home view, and there it is. And then we can also see the cut that I made here is still applies. The only problem is the reason it exists, it caused an issue, is because this sketch that I made was on the assumption that there was a bottom. There is no longer that same bottom. So if I want to get rid of it, I can say delete it. And the result is that this extrusion also needs to go away. And so this is another rotated object. And so the same shape made two different, completely different shapes with just a different rotation. Right? And that's a pretty powerful tool. So we went around the y-axis, and it gave us this kind of hollow, cone inside. And this one around the x-axis gives us this kind of almost, if I rotate the camera like this, it gives us almost this kind of flat base that we can sit something on top of. It's not facing maybe up, right side up, but that's not a big deal. The direction is not that important in the overall model, but we do have a lot of control. Let's go back to the Revolve a third time, and now let's try. So again, let's go back to the home view so we can see where it originally was, and there it is. And so we're revolving around this bottom line. We've done this one. Why don't we try another line? Let's try, if we can, an axis, and let's see. So we're going to choose axis, and I'm going to try that blue axis. I believe it'll let me. No, it won't. Let me see if I can get to it. I'm surprised it doesn't let me actually get to it. I'm going to hide these. Oh, no, I can't. I guess we're kind of limited in that case because there's no line going this way. I was hoping it would let us choose this, but since it's not really there, it's just a visual representation, I won't be able to rotate around it. Yeah, so we won't be able to mess with those too much. But potentially, and now again, the problem is that it has to, so now let's try revolving around this one. One more time. Let's get rid of it. Let's select. And there it is. So any line essentially can be revolved around. Now, revolving around this one produces a very strange shape. Now, unfortunately, we can't see the inside. The inside does have a hole in it, but we can't really see it. But if we were able to cut this open, we might notice this kind of hole inside of there. Let's cancel it one more time. And what other line can we revolve around? Let's try revolving around. Revolving around this line is probably the same as revolving around the bottom one. If we click this one. Oh, no, it's not, because it spins. The center point is here, so now we end up with like a divot on the inside and almost like a weird looking bowl. And so depending on what line you choose, you can get some pretty exotic objects. It's about planning, but one profile with many different lines can end up creating quite a bit of interesting results. Right, so I chose that one, let's choose this one, and the final one, I'm going to leave it there. As you can see, even though it's not centered on the origin, it's a pretty interesting shape. Right? And if I show the sketch one last time, now this thing is solid because you can see that there's no hole. This was the hole. This would have been the hole if it was there. But the result was we end up with this pretty strange looking shape. So the Revolve tool is powerful. You have to kind of plan out what your profile is going to be. And so if you want to make something that encloses around something, then this is not a bad idea. If you're making a ball and socket joint, this would not be a terrible choice to make this silhouette or the profile of a ball and socket, the socket part. And if you revolved it, then you would have the opening that the ball joint could connect into. So there's a lot of possibilities with the Revolve tool. I'll see you in the next video.